I was still in the recovery room when my husband walked in with divorce papers. Not flowers, not tears, not even the decency to wait until I could sit up straight. I had been under general anesthesia for 6 hours. My left side felt like someone had taken a crowbar to it. There was an IV in my arm, a catheter I was too groggy to be embarrassed about, and a nurse named, I later learned, Teresa, who had just finished checking my vitals and stepped out for maybe 3 minutes. 3 minutes. That's all it took for Adrian to slip through the door. He was wearing his good blazer, the charcoal one I'd bought him for his birthday 2 years ago, when I still thought things were good. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask if I was in pain. He set a manila envelope on the blanket covering my stomach, right over the surgical site, and said, "We need to talk." I stared at the ceiling for a moment. The fluorescent light above me had a small crack running through the plastic cover. I remember thinking that was a strange thing to focus on, but my brain was still half submerged in anesthetic fog, and the ceiling was easier to look at than his face. "What is that?" I said. It wasn't even really a question, something in me already knew. "It's what it looks like," he said. "I'm sorry, Maureen, but you knew this wasn't working, did I? Did I know that? Because 3 weeks ago, when his mother Georgette was told she'd need a kidney transplant or she would be dead within a year, I was the one who volunteered. I was the one who sat across from the transplant coordinator at St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto and said, yes, test me, I want to help. I was 52 years old and I had one healthy kidney to spare, and I thought I loved, this family enough to offer it. I tried to push the envelope off my stomach. My arm felt like it was filled with wet sand. "Adrian," I said, "I just had surgery." "I know," he said, "and I'm grateful. I am. But the timing, I repeated. He had the nerve to look uncomfortable, like I was the one making things awkward. "Let me back up, because you need to understand how we got here. You need to understand 23 years of marriage, of dinners and Christmas mornings and a daughter we raised together, of arguments about money and silences that stretched too long, of a woman, me, who kept choosing this family over and over again, even when it cost her something. My name is Maureen. I'm 54 years old. I used to live, in a townhouse in Mississauga, Ontario, the kind of neighborhood where people wave at each other over the fence and argue politely at city council meetings about tree bylaws. I taught high school English for 27 years. I coached the drama club. I drove my students to provincial competitions in a rented van and ate gas station sandwiches because the school board wouldn't cover the meal per diem. I was by most measures a dependable person. A steady person. Adrian came into my life when I was 31. He was charming in the way that certain men are charming. Not flashy, just consistent. He remembered things. He called when he said he would. He brought coffee without being asked. I fell for that consistency the way you fall for anything you've been quietly starved of. His mother, Georgette, was another matter. She made it clear from the beginning that I was not what she'd had in mind for her son. I was a teacher, not a professional. I didn't come from money. My father had been a plumber in Hamilton, and my mother had worked the reception desk at a physiotherapy clinic, and Georgette, who had grown up in a big house in Forest Hill, and still spoke about it like she'd lost a kingdom, never let me forget that she considered me a step down. For 23 years, I smiled at her across holiday tables. I brought her preserves from the farmer's market, even though she never thanked me. I listened to her opinions about how I was raising my daughter Chloe, how I was spending money, how I dressed, how Adrian deserved better, the school schedule and summers off. I absorbed it all, the way you do when you love someone's son, and you've decided that the price of the marriage is the mother. When she got sick, I was sorry. Genuinely sorry. She was 71 years old and her kidneys were failing, and I watched Adrian crumble in the way that grown men crumble when they're suddenly faced with losing their parents. And I thought, this is what you do. You show up. You help. I volunteered to be tested. The transplant team at St. Michael's ran compatibility blood work and tissue typing, and a full medical workup that took 3 separate appointments. I passed. I was a strong match. Strong enough that the transplant coordinator, a kind woman named Dr. Osi, told me the team was optimistic. Adrian cried when I told him. He held my face in his hands in the kitchen of our townhouse and said, "You're saving her life, Maureen. You're saving my mother's life." And I believed him. I believed that this act, this enormous irreversible act, would mean would mean everything. The surgery was scheduled for a Tuesday in October. I told my department head I'd need 6 to 8 weeks of recovery leave. I arranged for a colleague to cover my grade 11 class. I meal prepped and froze enough food to last a month, and organized all our household bills in a binder with color-coded tabs so Adrian wouldn't be overwhelmed while I recovered. I was thorough about it, the way I am thorough about most things. I'd been managing this household for 2 decades. I knew how to prepare. Chloe, my daughter, was 20 years old and studying nursing at McMaster. She offered to come home and stay with me during recovery. I told her not to worry, that her father would be there, that she had her studies. She hesitated on the phone in a way I didn't register at the time. "Mom," she said, "are you sure Dad is? Are you sure everything is okay with you two?" "Everything is fine," I said. "Your father is stressed about Grandma. It's been a hard few months." She went quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said finally, "but call me if you need anything. Promise me." I promised. I should have listened more carefully to the question she was actually asking. The surgery happened on a Tuesday. I remember the ceiling of the pre-op room counting tiles. I remember the anesthesiologist asking me to count backward from 10 and making it to 7. Then nothing. Then the recovery room and the fluorescent light with the crack in it, and Adrian in his charcoal blazer, and the manila envelope sitting on my stomach. "You can't be serious," I said. My voice was rough from the breathing tube. I barely recognized it. "I know the timing isn't ideal," he said again. "Like this was about scheduling, Adrian." I took a breath, even that hurt. "Where is your mother? Did the surgery go well, is she?" Something crossed his face then, a flicker of something that wasn't quite guilt but was adjacent to it. There were some complications," he said. "With the transplant." I waited. He looked at the floor. "They're going to explain it to you. The doctor is going to come in and explain. I wanted you to have the paperwork first, so you could start. So we could move forward." Move forward. He wanted me to be served divorce papers before the transplant surgeon came in to explain what had happened to my kidney. I still hadn't touched the envelope. "Get out," I said. "Maureen. Get out of this room right now, Adrian." He left. He actually left. He tucked the envelope under his arm and walked out, and I lay there staring at the crack in the ceiling and trying very hard not to cry. Because crying made my side hurt, and I was not going to give him my pain on top of everything else I had already given. Dr. O.C. came in about 20 minutes later. She pulled a chair up beside the bed and sat down, which told me before she said a word that this was going to be a serious conversation. "Maureen," she said, "how are you feeling?" "I've had better Tuesdays," I said. She gave me a small, careful smile, then she folded her hands and told me what had happened. The compatibility tests that had originally greenlit me as a donor were accurate. My kidney was healthy. I was a genuine match for the transplant process in terms of blood type and initial screening. What Dr. O.C.'s team discovered only during the final pre-surgical cross-match, the last test done immediately before transplant, was that Georgette's immune panel had been manipulated, not by the medical team, by someone else. Someone had accessed Georgette's patient file and altered a key marker in her compatibility data. It was sophisticated enough that it had slipped through the earlier review. The hospital's IT security team flagged it only when a technician ran a routine verification check that morning. What that meant, practically, was this. The transplant of my kidney into Georgette could never have safely proceeded. Her body would have rejected it almost immediately. The surgery had been halted the moment the discrepancy was discovered. My kidney had not gone to Georgette. Because I was already under anesthesia and the surgical team had to make a rapid ethical decision, my kidney, with the guidance of the Living Donor Program, was directed to a young woman named. I was told only her first name, Abigail, who had been waiting for 18 months on the National Transplant Registry, and was a near-perfect match. She was 23 years old. She was going to be okay. I lay there and let the room settle around me. "Who altered the file?" I said. Dr. O.C. was careful. "That's under investigation. The hospital has notified the police." "I can't tell you more than that." "Georgette's file," I said. "Who had access, Maureen?" "I promise you that our team will cooperate fully with the investigation. And I want you to know, you saved someone's life today. A young woman is going to have a future because of what you chose to do. That is real. That is not nothing." I knew it wasn't nothing. But I also knew that I had just lost a kidney under false pretenses, and that the man I'd been married to for 23 years had walked into my recovery room with divorce papers before I'd had a chance to understand any of it. Something was not adding up. The investigation moved quickly, which surprised me. I think I expected these things to take years, to be buried in process and paperwork the way most things are. But altering a patient's medical file in a Canadian hospital is a criminal offense, and the hospital took it with a seriousness that I hadn't anticipated. Within 48 hours of my surgery, a forensic audit of the hospital's electronic records system identified the access point. I was still in the hospital, still in considerable pain, when my daughter Chloe arrived. She had driven from Hamilton without telling me she was coming. She walked in with a Tim Hortons bag and red eyes, and she hugged me so gently I nearly came apart. "I knew something was wrong," she said. "I knew it." "What did you know?" I asked. She sat down. She looked older than 20. "Mom. He's been seeing someone. For a while I didn't know how to tell you. I thought maybe I was wrong. I thought maybe they were just friends." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Her name is Claudine. She works with him. She's been to the house, Mom, while you were at school." I sat with that. Claudine. I didn't know the name, but I knew the shape of it. The shape of a marriage slowly hollowed out from the inside. The way certain kinds of rot work, quiet and invisible until the whole structure gives way. "How long?" I said. "At least 2 years.
Maybe more.
2 years. The same 2 years I had been navigating Georgette's illness, supporting Adrian, organizing meals and medications, and driving to appointments. The same 2 years I had been earning the trust of his family by showing up, every time, without fail. The same 2 years during which someone with a reason to want me gone from Adrian's life, someone who stood to benefit from a clean exit, had apparently been thinking about how to use me before discarding me. Because here is what the police eventually pieced together, what the hospital's legal team eventually shared with my lawyer, and what I eventually had to sit very still to absorb. The plan, as best anyone could determine, had originated not with Georgette but with Claudine. Georgette was genuinely ill. Her kidneys were genuinely failing. That part was real. But Claudine, who was calculating in ways that Adrian apparently never had been, had seen an opportunity. If I donated a kidney to Georgette and then Adrian filed for divorce, it would look like a straightforward, if terrible, personal betrayal. The organ would already be gone. I would have no legal claim to reclaim it. I would be weakened, recovering, emotionally devastated. Adrian would be free, Georgette would have her kidney, and Claudine would have Adrian. What Claudine hadn't counted on was the cross-match. She had arranged for someone. A contact she had in the healthcare sector, details I still don't fully understand, to manipulate Georgette's file to make her appear compatible in the early stages of testing. Believing the process would move too fast for anyone to catch the discrepancy, she had not counted on the technician who ran the verification check that Tuesday morning. She had not counted on the fact that altered medical records leave trails. She had also not counted on me. Not the me lying in the recovery room, too groggy to process what was happening. The me who had taught high school English for 27 years. And coached drama and eaten gas station sandwiches and color-coded household binders. The me who had survived Georgette's condescension for 2 decades. And never once lost my head. That me was slow to anger and meticulous about everything and had been taking notes, quietly and carefully, for longer than Adrian or Claudine knew. I had not been happy in my marriage for some time. I want to be honest about that. There had been distance between Adrian and me for years. The particular distance that grows when 2 people stop choosing each other. When they become roommates with shared finances and a shared child and very little else. I had known something was wrong. I had not known it was this wrong. But I had also, 18 months before the surgery, quietly consulted a lawyer, not to file anything, not to act on anything, just to understand. To know what my rights were, what I was entitled to after 23 years. To have a name and a number in my phone that I hoped I would never need. Her name was Sandra Okonkwo and she was excellent. When Chloe helped me dial Sandra's number from my hospital bed, Sandra picked up on the second ring. I told her everything. She was quiet for a moment when I finished. "Okay," she said. "Don't sign anything. Don't respond to anything. Don't speak to Adrian without me present. He left divorce papers in my recovery room, I said. That's not how divorce papers work in Ontario, she said. He can't just leave papers on a bed. There's a process. Whatever he left you. It's theater. It was meant to unsettle you. A pause. Are you unsettled? I looked at Chloe sitting beside me holding my hand. I'm getting less unsettled by the minute, I said. What followed was frankly a lot of paperwork and waiting. I won't pretend it was clean or quick. These things never are. But let me tell you what happened, piece by piece, because I think you deserve to understand how it actually ended. Not the fantasy version, not the tidy movie version, but the real one. Claudine was charged criminally. The person she had hired to manipulate the hospital records. A former administrator who had worked briefly at a private diagnostic clinic was identified through digital forensics and also charged. In Canada, tampering with medical records is a serious criminal matter, and the Crown took it seriously. I was told by police that a conviction was likely. I don't know the final outcome yet, as the process is still moving through the courts, but the charges are substantial. Fraud, mischief in relation to computer data, and a charge related to conspiracy to endanger life. That last one came from the medical team's assessment that if the altered records had not been caught, if my kidney had been transplanted into Georgette without the cross-match, the outcome could have been fatal. Georgette knew more than she ever admitted publicly. The police investigation couldn't establish enough to charge her. But I know. I know because of things Adrian said later. In the terrible few conversations we had through lawyers. Oblique admissions about conversations at the dinner table. About things his mother had known and not corrected. She had been a willing passenger if not the driver. She did not get a new kidney. She was placed on the National Registry, where she would have to wait, as everyone waits, and hope, as everyone hopes. I found it hard to feel sorry for her. Sandra filed on my behalf almost immediately. 23 years of marriage, a jointly owned townhouse in Mississauga that had appreciated considerably since we'd bought it, Adrian's pension, our savings. In Ontario, family property law is clear. What was acquired during the marriage is divided. Adrian had spent 2 years planning his exit. He had not, apparently, spent any of that time talking to a family lawyer, who would have told him that you cannot simply walk out of a Canadian marriage with everything intact. He tried to argue that the marriage had been over in substance for years. That is a very different thing from being over in law. Sandra had 23 years of joint tax filings, mortgage documents, shared accounts, and a paper trail that told a different story than the one Adrian preferred. The settlement took 11 months. It was not pleasant, but at the end of it, I had the house. I chose to buy out his share rather than sell, and a settlement that reflected what 23 years of building a life together actually amounted to. I went back to teaching in January, 4 months after the surgery. My doctor had cleared me at the 3-month mark. My side still ached sometimes. A low background hum that I was told might fade over time, or might not. I walked into my classroom on a gray January morning, and my grade 12 students, who had apparently been briefed by my colleague that I had been through some kind of medical leave and nothing more, looked up at me with that particular expression teenagers have when they are trying to seem like they don't care but actually do. "Good morning," I said. "You were gone a really long time," said a boy in the 3rd row whose name was Devin. I said, "but I'm here now. Open your books." I did not tell them what I'd been through. That wasn't their business. But I taught that semester with something I can only describe as clarity. The kind of clarity that comes from having had every illusions stripped away and discovering that what's left is still standing. Chloe came home for the holidays that spring. The Victoria Day weekend, when Ontario softens and the lilacs come out along the back fences of Mississauga. She sat with me in the kitchen drinking tea, and we talked for a long time. The way we hadn't been able to when she was growing up, and I was too tired, and there was always dinner to make and marking to finish. She told me more about her nursing program. She told me she was seeing someone, a kind and quiet man named Theo who wanted to work in rural medicine. I told her about the settlement, about the house, about what I was thinking of doing with the 2nd bedroom now that it was just me. "What are you going to do with it?" she asked. "I'm thinking," I said, "that I might take in a student boarder. There's a girl from my grade 12 class going to U of T in September. Her family is in Thunder Bay. She's going to need somewhere to live. Chloe looked at me over her tea. You're going to take in a stranger. I was a stranger to a lot of people who helped me, I said. It goes around. She smiled at me then, the smile she'd had since she was small, lopsided, a little skeptical, entirely genuine. You're impossible, she said. I'm a teacher, I said. It's a prerequisite. What I want to tell you, what I want you to take away from all of this, is not a story about revenge. I know this kind of story often gets framed that way, and I understand why. Claudine was charged. Adrian lost the house and half his pension. Georgette is on a waiting list. There is satisfaction in that, I won't pretend otherwise. But the thing I think about most, on the mornings when my side aches and I'm drinking my coffee in the kitchen of my own house in Mississauga, my house, is Abigail, 23 years old, 18 months on the transplant registry, a future that almost didn't happen. She wrote me a letter. The transplant coordinator passed it through the anonymous channels that exist for these situations. I don't know her last name. I don't know what she looks like, but she wrote 3 pages, handwritten, and in the middle of the second page she said, I don't know who you are or why you did this, but you gave me back something I didn't know how to ask for. I read that letter 4 times at my kitchen table, and then I folded it carefully and put it in the drawer where I keep important things. Adrian took what he wanted from our marriage and assumed that was the end of it. He assumed I was someone who could be used up and discarded. He was wrong about that. I'm still here. I still walk the neighborhood in the evenings and wave at people over fences. I still buy preserves at the farmer's market, except now I keep them for myself. I still teach my students about stories, about why they matter, about how to find the line in a piece of writing that tells you what something is really about. I gave a kidney to save a life. It just turned out not to be the life anyone planned on. And some mornings, I think that's the most honest thing that's ever happened to me.